confess that the indolence that's actually and possibly exists there. Only that, instead of holding it to be the cause of the backwardness and the trouble, we regard it as the effect of the trouble and the backwardness by fostering the development of a lamentable predisposition.
Ay, tumingin dun sa
A hot climate requires of the individual quiet and rest, just as cold insight to labor and action. For this reason, the Spaniard is more indolent than the Frenchman. The Frenchman is more so than the German. The Europeans themselves, who reproach the residents of the colonies so much. How do they live in tropical countries? Surrounded by numerous rings of servants, not only to take off their shoes for them, but even to them. And yet, they eat and live better. They work for themselves to get rich, with the hope of a future, free and respected. While the poor colonist, the indolent colonist, is badly nourished, has no hope, toils for others, and works under force and compulsion.
Who is the indolent one in the Manila offices? Is it the poor clerk who comes in 8 in the morning and leaves at 1 in the afternoon with only his parasol, who copies and writes and works for himself and for his chief? Or is it the chief who comes in a carriage at 10 o'clock, leaves before 12, reads his newspaper while smoking, and with his feet cocked up on a chair or table, or gossiping about all his friends?
Evil is not that indolence exists, more or less latently, but that it is fostered and magnified.
When in consequence of a long chronic illness, the condition of the patient is examined. The question may arise whether the weakening of the fibers and the debility of the organs are the cause of the maladies continuing or the effect of the bad treatment that prolongs the action. The attending physician attributes the entire failure of his skill to the poor constitution of the patient, to climate, to the surrounding, and so on. Something like this happens in the case of the Philippines. Instead of the physician, read government. That is, friars, employees, etc. Instead of patient, Philippines. Instead of malady, indolence.
All of the histories of the first years abound in long accounts about the industry and agriculture of the natives. Mines, gold washings, looms, etc. are things encountered at every step, and considering the time and the conditions in the islands, prove that there was life, there was activity, there was movement.
Accordingly, the Filipinos, in spite of the climate, in spite of their needs, were not indolent creatures of our time, and as we shall see later on, their ethics and their mood of life were not what is now complacently attributed to them.
Go!
When a house becomes disturbed and disordered, we should not accuse the youngest child or the servants, but the head of it, especially if his authority is unlimited. He who does not act freely is not responsible for his actions, and the Filipino people, not being master of its liberty, is not responsible for either its misfortunes or its joys.
Moreover, why work? Ask many natives. The curate says that the rich man will go to heaven. The rich man on earth is liable to all kinds of trouble, to be appointed as the cabeza de barangay, to be deported if an uprising occurs, to be forced banker of the military chief of the town. Why be rich? So that all officers of justice may have a lynx eye on your actions.
From his birth until he sinks into his grave, the training of the native is brutalizing, depressive, and anti-human.
Peoples and governments are correlated and complementary. A stupid government would be an anomaly among righteous people, just as corrupt people cannot exist under the just rulers and wise laws. Like people, like government, we will say in paraphrase of a popular adage.
Go!
You can't know more than this or that old man. Don't aspire to be a greater than the curate. You belong to an inferior race. You haven't any energy. This is what they tell the child, and they repeat it so often. It has perforce to become engraved in the mind, and then mold and pervade all his actions. The child or youth who tries to be anything else is blamed with vanity and presumption. The curate ridicules him with frugal sarcasm. His relatives look upon him with fear, the strangers regard him with great compassion. No forward movement. Get back in the ranks and keep in line.
Without education and liberty, which are the soil and the Son of Man, no reform is possible. No measure can give the result desired. This does not mean that we should ask first for the native the instruction of passage and all imaginable liberties, in order then to put a hoe in hoe's hand or place him in a workshop. Such a pretension would be an absurdity and vain folly. What we wish is that obstacle be not put in his way, not to increase the men in his climbing and the situation of the islands already created for him. That instruction be not begrudged him for fear that when he becomes intelligent, he may separate from the colonizing nation or ask for the rights of which he makes himself worthy. Since someday or other, he will become enlightened, whether the government uses it or not. Let his enlightenment be as a gift received, and not as conquered plunder.